He thought he could beat the system like he beat his wife. Let's call him Joe. That wasn't his real name, of course, but he doesn't deserve the dignity of being remembered by it. What he does deserve is what happened to him, every single ounce of it. You see, Joe was a wife beater, not just once, not just during a moment of rage. Joe built his entire identity on control, intimidation, and fists. He was the kind of man who thought fear was a language and pain was a sentence. I didn't meet Joe through a criminal case. I met him through civil court, through vengeance disguised as a legal proceeding. My client was Joe's former brother-in-law, the brother of the woman Joe used to hurt. He had his own reasons for coming to me. A failed business partnership with Joe had left him financially damaged. Emotionally, he was wrecked. Imagine watching your sister get crushed and manipulated by someone like that. But this wasn't about healing. This was about justice. I took the case not because it was easy, but because it felt personal the moment I read the first line of the complaint. Joe had spent years believing he could break people, lie to judges, scare off attorneys. It had always worked. Threats, tears, staged, remorse. He had weaponized them all. He even got away with a child support-free divorce from my client's sister. But not this time. This time, he met someone more stubborn, more meticulous, and far more patient than he ever anticipated. He met me. When we filed the lawsuit, Joe barely reacted. He walked into that courtroom like it was a formality, a little speed bump in his day. He didn't even hire a lawyer at first. He genuinely believed he could bluff his way through. That had worked for him before, so why not again? But he had no idea who he was dealing with. I wasn't just an attorney. I was the end of his charade. Joe walked into court with that smug little smile I've seen on too many men like him, the kind who think that truth is optional and consequences are just for people without fists. He lied under oath, boldly, repeatedly, without blinking. He told the judge outrageous stories that contradicted documented facts. He faked receipts, doctored emails, and even brought in a so-called witness who turned out to be a friend from his drinking days. None of it worked. Because, while Joe was playing games and performing for the courtroom, I was building a wall around him. Every lie he told made that wall taller. Every false document gave me one more brick to seal his fate. I kept calm. I kept quiet. I let him talk himself deeper into the hole while I prepared to bury him in it. When the judgment came down, it wasn't small. It wasn't symbolic. It was massive, far more than Joe could ever dream of paying. The look on his face when the number was read out loud was the first real moment of silence I ever saw from him. He wasn't just shocked. He was cornered. He tried everything to wriggle out of it. Transferring property to friends, creating shell companies, pretending to be broke. It was all so clumsy, so desperate. He thought he could hide things from me. But I had already seen his type before. Guys like Joe always underestimate how far a lawyer will go when you make it personal. I tracked down every asset he had. Bank accounts, vehicles, investments, rental properties. He tried to get clever, but it didn't matter. I had investigators watching his every move. He blinked, and we were already 3 steps ahead. He stalled for years, but the clock always runs out. Piece by piece, I dismantled his financial life. Every account was frozen, every hiding place exposed. He'd built his life on control, but now he couldn't control anything at all. He was slipping. Fast. Eventually, Joe was left with one thing. Just one property that hadn't been touched. It was a small rental house, and it became his entire world. He clung to it like a lifeline. The upstairs was rented out, and he lived in the unfinished basement. That rent money was the only cash he had coming in. He couldn't open a bank account without me finding it and garnishing it immediately, so he cashed the rent checks at payday. Loan shops. The fees were brutal, but that was the cost of staying invisible. For a while, he managed to keep that house hidden. Technically, he didn't own it directly. It was under a numbered company. He probably thought he was being clever, but my investigator followed him one day, watched where he went after a court hearing, and that's how we found it. His precious little hideaway. From that point forward, it was a slow and deliberate process. Joe represented himself, hoping to stall. He tried to claim that the property had nothing to do with him. He created layers of fake ownership, filed paperwork that made no sense, and leaned hard on technicalities. But I was patient. I pierced through every fraudulent transfer, every corporate veil. I knew exactly what he was doing, and the court knew it too. Eventually, the house was mine, or rather, it was my client's, through a nominee. The day we took possession, Joe was out buying cigarettes. When he came back, the sheriff had already changed the locks. He stood outside that house, the same house he had once used to control tenants and scrape by. Now he couldn't even get into his own basement. His lawyer, a local guy working for free, called me, said Joe had nowhere else to go, asked if maybe we could let him stay in the basement. I told him the truth. It wasn't my decision anymore. The new owner didn't want him back. And the new owner was one of my client's employees. That house, the last thing Joe owned on earth, was no longer his. Just like that, the man who used to walk into rooms with a swagger was now homeless, except for one thing. He still had his truck. Joe's truck was a monster. Big, loud, rusted, out, and barely running. The kind of thing that guzzled gas faster than he could afford it. But it was his last possession. His last shred of control. He started living in that truck, parking it wherever he could, trying to pretend he still had some dignity left. It wasn't worth seizing. Too old, too beat up. I had no interest in taking it away from him. Honestly, letting him keep it felt like a final kindness, something to remind him of what he used to have. That was until he made the mistake. One afternoon, I got a call from the tenants at the house he used to own, the one we had seized. Joe had come back. He had parked his truck across the driveway, completely blocking them in. He wasn't there to visit. He wasn't there to talk. He had done it out of spite. Just pure pathetic anger. After parking, he stormed off into town, shouting that he'd be back later to sleep in the truck. I asked the tenant if they could get around it. They couldn't. He had parked it in a way that made sure no one could come or go, so I made a call. Back. In my criminal defense days, I used to work with a lot of tow truck drivers. I called one of the guys I still trusted, gave him specific instructions. In a few hours, that truck was gone. Not crushed, not impounded, just moved. But I had it parked somewhere meaningful. The next morning, Joe's lawyer called me. He wasn't happy. My client wants his truck back, he said. I told him it wasn't going to happen. Joe had no right to block someone's driveway. He had pushed too far, and this time there would be a consequence. You have no legal right to that truck, he said. And he had no right to harass tenants, I replied. We were at a standoff. Joe's lawyer threatened court, said they'd be filing papers that afternoon. Said Joe was on his way to sign an affidavit, but I wasn't worried. I already had a plan. The next morning was perfect. Bright, calm, quiet. I stood by my office window 15 stories up, sipping coffee and looking down at the parking lot below. The phone rang. I already knew who it was. Before I picked up, it was Joe's lawyer. You think this is funny? He snapped. Why didn't you tell me the truck was parked right outside my office? I smiled. Is that so? I said, as if I didn't already know. I could see the truck from where I stood. Right there in the lot. Right in front of the lawyer's building. How careless of my tow guy, I added. I really must speak to him. Joe's lawyer wasn't amused. My client's going to sue. No, he's not, I replied. He's going to get in his truck and drive away. Right now. There was silence for a moment. Then I explained that the tow guy had even filled up the tank and done an oil change. All of it was on the house. A gift, if you will. Tell your client to get in that truck and drive off, I said. Because if I ever see that vehicle again, I will seize it to satisfy the rest of my client's judgment. And this time, there won't be any mercy. He tried to argue. He tried to puff up. But I was done. I ended the call, placed the phone down, and took another sip of my coffee. A few minutes later, I saw movement down below. Joe walked out of the lawyer's office and slowly crossed the parking lot to his truck. I watched him the entire way. There was no anger in his walk. No confidence. No fight. Just a man completely broken. There was no bounce in his step anymore. The joy was gone. The fire was gone. He wasn't just homeless or bankrupt. He was emptied out. Completely. A shell.
You've heard the case. While you consider your verdict, the court calls the next case to order.
I played the long game and it ended his marriage and career. I'm not a pro at revenge, but patience, that I have in abundance. And when someone lies to me, especially about something as important as my home, I don't forget. I don't forgive. I just wait. 7 years ago, I finally hit a personal milestone. I bought my own house. I'd spent a decade saving every spare dollar, working long hours, skipping vacations, and dreaming about the day I'd finally have a place to call my own. When that day came, I was proud. I was excited. I thought I had done everything right. But because I was buying solo, I had to make some compromises. I couldn't afford a detached house in a flashy neighborhood. Instead, I looked at properties on shared blocks. Where I'm from, that often means strata title, a setup with shared responsibility for things like maintenance and insurance. It's cheaper, sure, but it also comes with a mountain of rules, restrictions, and communal decisions. For someone like me, private, introverted, fiercely independent, that wasn't ideal. So I took my time and searched for something rare, a property that was freehold but still on a shared block. That way, I'd avoid all the strata nonsense, but still stay within budget. Eventually, I found one that checked every box. The listing said it was freehold. The agent I spoke with confirmed it. Even my lawyer reviewed everything and gave it the green light. It felt like the perfect match. But 5 months after I moved in, I got a knock at the door. It was the landlord from next door, and he wanted to talk about our shared insurance. No problem. I asked for a copy of his policy, just so I could keep things organized. That's when everything started to unravel. When I looked at the insurance paperwork he gave me, something felt off. The policy wasn't for a standard public liability split, it was for strata insurance. That didn't make sense. Strata insurance meant we were in a strata-titled property, and that directly contradicted everything I'd been told, sold, and reassured about. I started digging. I contacted my lawyer, the one who handled the conveyancing. He was just as shocked as I was. He reviewed all the documents again and confirmed the ugly truth. The property I'd bought wasn't freehold at all. It was, without question, a strata title, which meant I had unknowingly stepped into the exact situation I had spent years trying to avoid. I was livid, but more than that, I felt betrayed. I had trusted the real estate agent, not personally but professionally. He was a local guy, known in the area, and we had mutual friends. There were maybe 3 degrees of separation between us, which gave me some level of comfort when I made the purchase. That trust was now completely shattered, so I did what any rational wronged buyer would do. I gathered my evidence. I printed out the listings, which clearly said freehold. I pulled up emails between the real estate agent and my lawyer, all affirming the same thing. I arranged a meeting with the agent and laid it all out. Black and white. Undeniable. He looked me in the face and denied everything. No apology, no explanation, no effort to make it right. Just a smug refusal to accept any fault. And when I asked him to cover the cost of selling the home in the future, as a fair compromise, he flat out refused. The best he offered was $1,000 to make it go away. $1,000 for knowingly selling me a lie. I could have taken legal action. The mediator I met with even encouraged it. But at the time, my health was shaky, and I just didn't have the strength to fight a drawn-out legal battle. So I let it go. At least, that's what it looked like from the outside. I wasn't going to get justice through the courts, but that didn't mean he'd get away with it. I just needed time, and the right idea. And then, I found it. One night, I decided to look him up. On Facebook. His personal profile wasn't even set to private. Rookie mistake. There, in plain sight, were photos from a boys on tour trip he had taken just a few months after I moved in, right around the time of our dispute. Sun, drinks, beaches, and lots of ego. He looked like the kind of guy who thought he was untouchable, but he wasn't. Not anymore. Using a public business registry, I tracked down his home address. All it took was one online search and a few clicks. I stared at the screen for a long time that night, thinking, what could I do? What would hit him where it hurt? But not directly, not loudly, not in a way he could trace back to me. That's when the idea clicked. I'd mess with his life, just enough to get under his skin. Not sabotage, not vandalism, just confusion. Unease, paranoia, something he'd never be able to shake off. I wrote the first note by hand. Dear real estate agent, remembering you on this, our special day. She has your eyes. Love, L. Then I sent it, with a beautiful bouquet of flowers, to his home, and I did it again the next year. And the next. For 6 years straight. Every year, like clockwork, I sent him flowers on the anniversary of the house sale. Always from L. Always with a cryptic, emotional message. Some were variations of that first note. Others played with the idea of a shared child, or a longing to reconnect. But the tone was always just vague enough to feel real, to spark doubt, to plant questions. Thinking of you and our time in the sun, she still asks about you. On this day, I remember everything. Signed, always, L. I never gave a return address, never left a trail, just a name and a perfectly timed reminder of something he'd never quite explained to anyone else. But I didn't stop there. I found out the name of the country he had traveled to during that boys on tour trip. Every now and then, I'd arrange for postcards and handwritten letters to be sent from there too. A different postmark, a new twist, a whisper from the past. And all the while, I said nothing. I lived my life, paid my mortgage, watered my plants. But on that one day, every year, I reminded him that the past wasn't done with him. A few weeks ago, I was out with some friends, some of whom are connected to him through mutual acquaintances. Someone mentioned casually that the agent had left the real estate business. I pretended not to care. But inside, I was listening very carefully. Turns out he wasn't just unemployed. He was divorced, had lost his home, and had taken a massive financial hit in the process. His life had completely imploded. The story, as I heard it, was almost too perfect to believe. Apparently, his wife had grown suspicious over the years. Every year on the same day, he'd receive anonymous flowers and mysterious notes. At first, he passed them off as a prank. But as the years went by, the story started to crack. The consistency, the personal messages, the emotional tone, it all got too hard to ignore. Eventually, she figured out what the date was. The anniversary of our house sale. She confronted him, and under pressure, he confessed. He told her he had cheated during that boys on tour trip, that it happened around the same time as that now infamous anniversary, and that the mysterious L might have been real, and that's when the final thread snapped. The kicker? I later learned that a year before I bought my house, he came home from that same trip with an STD and gave it to his wife. He somehow convinced her back then that it wasn't from him, but now she saw the full picture. And this time, there was no lie big enough to cover the truth. He lost everything. His wife, his house, his business, and a big chunk of his retirement savings. And the best part? I never laid a hand on him. I never raised my voice. I never even confronted him. All I did was remind him of the moment he thought he got away with. It And to be honest, part of me did feel a little guilty at first. I didn't mean for his whole life to fall apart, just for him to feel something, to know that what he did wasn't forgotten, that someone out there still remembered his lie. But then I'd think about how smug he looked when he denied everything, how easily he dismissed the truth, how quick he was to offer me a cheap payoff and expect me to vanish. And the guilt faded. Because people like him, they don't learn from being confronted. They learn from the slow burn of consequences they don't see coming. I may not be a revenge expert, but I played the long game, and in the end, I won. Because karma, like me, is patient, and she never forgets.
The case has been heard. The stories have been told. Now it's your turn to judge. Leave your verdict in the comments. Like, share, and subscribe. The Court of Stories is always in session.